Hey guys, so I'm going to tell the story now of just a beautiful non-typical buck that I killed in 2018 with my bow. And this buck is just an impressive looking deer. I mean, it's got, it ends up being right at 200. It was like an eighth, 200 and an eighth or something like that, but just a beautiful looking deer, not super wide as far as the main frame goes, or main beams, but it's just a really impressive looking deer. And so the story begins much like most of my archery bucks, mid-June. And at this early stage, you can kind of just tell that they're going to be big kind of by their mass, and maybe if they're starting to fork that first fork. But in general, it's kind of hard to tell what they're going to be that early. But so I found this buck, and this is after kind of the Trail Creek buck. I got a taste of those bigger bucks, like the previous 4 or 5 years. And but I hadn't ever revisited that 200 mark since I was 16 yet. And I was thirsting for that. I was looking for that special buck. And anyways, I just picked through all these bucks and ended up finding this deer that I could tell was going to end up looking real good, or growing out to be, just a good buck. And so I kept him on the hit list and kept watching him. And as July kind of developed, as he developed during July and August, he just blossomed. I mean, he kind of grew his main frame out, and then these little stickers and kickers and inlines and stuff were just starting to pop out of everywhere. And just a beautiful, beautiful deer. He's kind of a river bottom buck, not really a high country. I mean, he's in the high country because we just live in the high country, but he's more of a lowlands buck. And so he was down in this river bottom area, and my wife and I, I'm trying to keep him located throughout July and August, and I try and go visit him he was easy to kind of see, easy to pick up, and so I'd go check him out every couple days and make sure that kind of watch, see if anybody else had picked him up or anything like that, and figure out his bedding areas and everything like that. Good ambush points. Anyways, but my wife and I got this crazy idea, and we hopped on some river tubes. This was the funniest thing, the most crazy locating experience I've ever done. But we hopped on this in this river, and tubes are pretty quiet if you just hold still. And I knew that during the day this river bottom buck, he would go down, and there's a bunch of big cottonwoods and willows and stuff that he'd bed in with all of his buddies. And so, but I didn't know exactly where, and I never had the guts to go down in there walking. So anyways, Kayla and I hopped on some tubes one date night and grabbed the binos and floated down through there. And it was the craziest, most kind of magical thing that happened. We came around this bend, we're hand in hand holding on with these tubes, and as we come around this bend, that buck is standing from us at like 15 feet right off the shore. And he actually, I think he had just been drinking out of that the river there. And he lifted his head with that giant velvet rack. And my wife still talks about that today, how crazy looking that was and how amazing. And he pegged us and bounced off, but I don't think he really even knew. I mean, we held super still, and it didn't bump him from his spot. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't successful in pinning his bedding area, but it was a dang cool experience to share with my wife. And then, so we're counting down to opening day, shooting my bow like crazy, and just mentally preparing for sitting behind these sagebrush that's going to happen, and whatever I'm going to have to do to make it happen. And hunting the high country in the mountains and hunting the lowland, it's a totally different game. And there's things that are more difficult on the lowland, and there's things that are more difficult in the high country. And I prefer the high country, but I'm not against trying to kill bucks in any location or any terrain. And anyways, so mentally I'm just trying to prepare, for sitting, waiting, and long days of just being in the hot sun, trying to, be in an ambush point or something like that. But so a week before the season opens, I'm every single day, checking this buck morning and night, making sure, watching him, seeing what he's doing. And as I'm watching him, I'm seeing pickups start showing up, and the word, I think, got out around. And these easier bucks to get to, people start showing up because it's not hard to go see them. And so pickups start showing up, and I get word people are starting to go after it, like putting plans together or whatever. And I hadn't told anybody except my wife and my dad and maybe a couple friends what I was doing. I actually told one of my best buddies, Wrangler Williams, and he's a diehard just killer. You got to look him up on Instagram, and just an amazing guy. He's one of my best buddies, but he knew, and just my wife and my dad and mom and my boys, obviously. But yeah, so a week's going by, and I'm just starting to get nervous and more nervous because the location that he's at is not that difficult to get to. Plus, it's got some private around it, things like that are just, I don't know. I didn't know who was going to be around. And so finally it's the evening of the opener, and I'm just like super paranoid and anxious about this opener, and because the bucks had gone in or come out into a feeding area just like they did for the last week, and I knew that next morning there was going to be guys wandering around. And just like I thought, I woke up super early, got in the pinch point, ambush point, and sure enough, there's 4 other guys walking around down in there, and just blew the heck out of that whole area. Deer were running all over the place. I mean, there was does and bucks I had never seen before running around down in there. And that big old buck, I saw him for a second coming out of his feeding area, and he hit those trees and he blew out of there and went clear across the valley, across the river and out into this big old area with these trees and sagebrush. And I was disgusted with just what happened. And I mean, everybody has a chance, and I wasn't frustrated anybody else. I was just I had invested so much time into that deer. It was just frustrating for me to not even have a chance on opening day. And so, he's out in this big old sagebrush area with these trees, and so I snuck in. I basically tracked him within about 200 yards of where he was at, and he had laid down he had one other 3-point that he was with, and they had laid down in this sagebrush. I just flat out, just right in the middle of the sagebrush. There was a few cottonwoods kind of up a ways from him, but so what I did was I just kind of followed along, and I saw where they had laid down, and then I just basically where they had run out in the sage, I sat on that trail hoping that they would return that night, kind of back towards where they had lived during the earlier season. And I sat there under that sagebrush I think it was 8 hours in the hot sun. I mean, it was 100 degrees, I think, that day. I was sweating. It was horrible. And every 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I'd pop up and scan and make sure that he wasn't up. And I, at that point, I had just barely got into more bow hunting. And I wasn't really aware of like the secondary bed or their second beds. And looking back on it, I think what happened is during the time that I was like hunkered up under this sagebrush, one of those times he had gotten up and moved, because that night I never saw him. And anyways, I went home pretty disappointed, but hopeful for the next day. And just so happened that the next day I went down and kind of I had backed out completely and tried to relocate where he was at, and I couldn't find him. And so that whole day I couldn't even find him. And so the next morning I got up and I went back across the river out into that big open sage area to see if I could locate him early in the morning. And my dad was also kind of out looking around, and anyways, he got a hold of me and was able to let me know that buck was kind of on the other side across the river, so away from where I was at. And I just, he said, it's headed towards a certain area of trees, and I knew exactly where those were. I knew kind of where his path was, or at least where he had done or gone before, and he was with another little buck, and it should, anyways, he kind of shared a plan to what we should do next. And anyways, after that, I just hauled butt across to this point where I could try and get an ambush on him. And it was probably 30 minutes by the time I got there. I mean, I had to cook pretty good across there. I just ran across the river in my hunting camo and stuff. And so I got soaked boots. I'm laying in this spot. It's just grassy up about waist deep grass, this thick tall grass. And I looked down the path to where he had been, and sure enough, I see this rack coming, and it's coming pretty quick. And so I just get set up, get my bow ready, and to where I think he's going to come out is about 20 yards. And so the buck comes in, the big buck comes in, and then the little buck behind him, right as soon as he's going to get to the trees, that big buck stops and lets that little buck kind of go in first. And I think that's a pretty cool thing that these bigger deer do, is they kind of test the waters with these littler bucks and then see if they're good to go in. But yeah, so at that point, I mean, he's at 50 yards out there, and I just was dead calm still in that grass, just holding super still. And I actually was like bent over kind of underneath the level of the grass, and I could just see that littler buck kind of coming by, and he walked over, walked towards me and scanned the horizon. Didn't wind me. I was just downwind of him, which was great. And he walked by, and then that big old buck came through, and as soon as he kind of put his head down, I popped up, and as I was popping up, I drew my bow, and I kind of went into a flow state, just more instinctive kind of pin set release, and that arrow met its mark just perfect. And he ran around, and it took off into these trees, and that was it. I mean, I was very, very happy to get that deer. It was my second 200 after that one when I was 16, and just a beautiful, beautiful deer. And my buddy Wrangler, that was the first person I messaged after I had messaged my dad too, and let him know. I had Dad kind of come towards where I was at, and then Wrangler was up hunting elk up on the hill, and he knew I was after him, and he was stoked about that. And anyways, it ended up, I think Wrangler actually bailed off the hill and came down because he ended up meeting me, and we all walked up on it and admired this big giant rack. And it was cool to kind of have it in the lower land too, because Kayla and the boys could have experienced it, and they could go see where it was at, and it was just a neat hunt. It wasn't a super extreme physical hunt or anything like that, but these bigger deer, they live everywhere. A lot of people dedicate themselves to one specific area, the sage or the high country or whatever. These bucks live in every terrain, every topography you can think of. And so, I'm not against going after them in the lowlands too, but what a cool experience. He was just right at 200, and beautiful deer. He's a great mount. Had one of my favorite taxidermists mount him up, and he turned out really cool. One detail I had forgot to tell you about is he, on his G2, on his back's right side, he had broken the last 6 inches off. I don't know, he was just rubbing on a tree or something, or I don't know exactly what happened, but it was just hanging there, hanging off the backside for a couple days, and I kept watching it, and it was kind of flopping around, and then it kind of became more firm, which was kind of crazy. And then, so, you could tell there was still blood flow to it, and it started balling up a little bit. And then a couple days before, August 30th-ish, he rubbed his velvet. I ended up killing him, and he was rubbed off with that horn actually or that little drop thing had busted off. So I had ended up getting it fixed, and it was super cool. I mean, what a cool buck. He's just a beautiful specimen of mule deer, and I was super, super excited to get him.